June of 2013. The sun was beaming down on my face, and I was surrounded by the warm summer air of Ecuador, a small country in South America. I was standing in a circle beside other Americans such as myself, and even though I was the youngest of the group, the emotions streaming across my face were exactly the same as the emotions of everyone else standing in the circle. We all stood, staring in complete discomfort and disbelief at the scene that was unraveling before our very eyes. It was a scene that we as Americans had never been exposed to before. At the center of our circle were three living beings: a man, a woman, and a guinea pig. Both the man and the woman were indigenous natives of Ecuador. The man stood very calmly with his eyes closed, wearing shorts but no shirt so that his torso was exposed to the warm summer air. Beside him stood the elderly woman, who was incredibly short in comparison to all of the Americans forming a circle around her. She was a shaman, or in other words, an indigenous healer, and she was about to perform a healing ceremony and cleansing ritual to relieve the man's soul of any negative energy. And then there was the guinea pig, resting alive and well in a cage beside the woman. I was confused at first when the woman began to blow smoke around the man's body, but my confusion became even greater when the small older woman began to drink hard liquor straight from a bottle. But instead of swallowing the alcohol, she intentionally spit in the direction of the man, spraying a fine mist all over his face. But the man remained calm and still. He seemed completely unaffected by that sudden burst of mist that came upon his skin. The woman then opened the cage that held the guinea pig. She held the guinea pig firmly in both of her hands, her right hand resting on one end of the small animal, her left hand on the other end. It was at that moment that my momentary feeling of confusion became a deep feeling of disbelief. The woman began to roll the guinea pig all over the man's body. First, she passed the body of the guinea pig over the man's head, then his torso, then his arms and his legs, until the guinea pig had been rolled over every single inch of the man's exposed skin. But throughout the ritual, the man didn't grimace, wince, or reveal even the slightest bit of discomposure. It was the belief of the indigenous population that the guinea pig would absorb any ounce of negative, unhealthy, or toxic energy from the man's body. Both the man and the woman believed that the guinea pig was the key to relieving the man's soul and cleansing it so that there was a balance to his inner spirit. Throughout the ritual, I couldn't help but stare in puzzled disbelief, overcome with a strange feeling of confusion and discomfort, seeing the way this everyday household pet here in the United States was being passed on the skin of an indigenous man. Just a week before watching the ritual, the other Americans and I had been sitting in a restaurant, confused about the fact that guinea pig wasn't only an option on the menu, but considered to be a culinary delicacy in Ecuador. But that puzzled confusion we faced that day in the restaurant paled in comparison to what we faced a week later. It was such a strange experience, seeing how a small animal we feed, pet, and sometimes even clothe here in America was being used as a source of cleansing for an indigenous ceremony. Now, both of my parents are immigrants from Ecuador, so I'd originally gone to Ecuador that summer to visit my extended family. But the opportunity presented itself for me to join a group of American college students who were traveling around and visiting different villages in Ecuador to learn about the indigenous population. And since I'm a curious individual, I decided to tag along for the adventure. I was fascinated by the idea of learning about a culture that I knew very little about, but I hadn't expected that I would experience any moment of discomfort as intense as what I had felt when watching the cleansing ritual. The unusual, perplexing feeling that overwhelmed me when I saw the guinea pig was, yes, completely unexpected, but it was one of the most significant and vital aspects of the trip. It was that unusual feeling of disorientation, although unwelcome at first, that truly paved the way for all of us to not only become aware of the Ecuadorian indigenous population, but to truly appreciate and understand its existence. Now, I just want to lead into this idea of culture shock. Culture shock is that overwhelming, perplexing feeling that you face when you are suddenly exposed to an unfamiliar culture, way of life, or set of attitudes. This was exactly what I'd experienced, and even though it was a moment of culture shock I hadn't initially desired, it's a shock that I'm ultimately glad to have come across. When we as human beings are placed in unfamiliar environments, with unfamiliar people doing unfamiliar things, we have a natural tendency to feel overwhelmed, disoriented, and overall uncomfortable. But discomfort is an inevitable and natural part of life, and that discomfort that results from being exposed to a cultural environment that is different from your own is a discomfort that we should welcome. Now, the word shock in the term culture shock tends to have a negative connotation. We hear the word shock and we automatically associate it with harm, danger, and electricity. But the thing is, you need a little bit of an electric shock if you want some sparks to fly, and that's exactly what happened to me. Experiencing that moment of culture shock was, yes, at first strange, surprising, and a little bit frightening, but it eventually proved to be exhilarating, thought-provoking, and electrifying, as I had the opportunity to wear the clothes of the natives, hear their music, listen to their stories, join in their dancing, and stay in their homes. In time, that initial electric culture shock sparked a desire within me to expand my knowledge of cultural diversity. As my puzzled disbelief faded, it was gradually replaced by a sense of fascination and then appreciation for the cultural lifestyles of other human beings. When I came home that summer, I decided to volunteer as a teaching assistant for a class offered to refugees from different countries around the world, like Ethiopia and Nepal, so that the refugees could learn how to adjust to the American way of life. The refugees learned the names of different American dollar bills and different coins, different American states and cities on the map. They worked on handwriting skills, math skills, and how to introduce themselves by smiling, shaking hands, and saying hello. As I watched the refugees struggling to understand the social norms of America, struggling to understand the customs that I as an American come across every single day, I began to wonder if they were experiencing that same type of unpleasant confusion that I had initially felt when visiting the villages. What was truly beautiful about working with the refugees was that their initial unease was gradually replaced by an enthusiasm and genuine desire to learn about the American way of life. I came to the realization that even though I was helping to teach the refugees about my own lifestyle as an American, the refugees had so much more to teach me about life in general. It was through their actions and desire to learn that the refugees taught me that that initial discomfort I had faced when visiting the villages is a discomfort that I should willingly embrace. Yes, my time throughout the villages was an unexpected experience in an unfamiliar environment, but it was ultimately one of the most insightful cultural experiences I have ever had. Now, people have a tendency to believe that the only way to truly understand different cultures and embrace one another's differences is by adopting the cultural lifestyles of other people. But the key isn't to mesh our cultures together into one. Doing that would get rid of the beauty of cultural diversity. Frankly, it would eliminate diversity altogether. The key to establishing a more united and accepting society is by being open to that feeling of discomfort that results from being exposed to a cultural environment that is different from your own. Because it is that discomfort that will eventually allow you to develop an appreciation for cultural diversity and an even greater understanding of its existence. Now, some people would say that because the members of our society haven't learned how to fully embrace and understand one another's cultural differences, we now live in a society that is broken, like a pile of shattered pieces of glass that can't seem to fully come together. But take a look at this image behind me. This is a building in San Diego, California, called the Villa Harvey Mandel. And on this building, there's a glass tile mosaic that is 43 feet wide and 72 feet tall. When you stare at this mosaic, you can't help but be amazed. I know that I am every single time that I see it. But even though your initial reaction may be to stare in awe and admire the colors and the images of the people, I encourage you to look deeper, to see the beauty of each of the individual pieces of glass that form this overall work of art. Each individual piece of glass may seem very similar to those that surround it, but in reality, each piece is very different in its shape, its size, and even its color. And just like these pieces of glass are different, we as human beings are different as well. Most view this mosaic as being beautiful because of the colors and the images of the people. But I think the beauty of the mosaic really lies in the way that each of these pieces, although different, are able to come together, align, and form a remarkable work of art. But these pieces of glass aren't meshed or melted together into one shape. If you look closely, you can see how they have come together in such a way that each of these individual pieces have still retained their own original beauty. We are like these pieces of glass. We have the potential, the utmost capacity to come together, align, but to still retain the beauty of our own cultural differences. Unfortunately, the beauty of our society's diversity is overshadowed by the way that we allow our differences to lead to conflicts, fighting, and animosity. But there is a way to prevent the growth of further conflict. There is a way to form the more united and accepting society that we have always desired. And the way to do that is by embracing one another's differences and embracing that discomfort that results when you are exposed to an unfamiliar cultural environment. It is by seeking that cultural knowledge and accepting it that we will be able to make a positive impact in our society and finally bring the shattered pieces of glass together. Thank you.